Good evening, brothers and sisters. I greet you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth, my Lord, my Savior, my King, my Redeemer forever. Paul says, to us has been given the privilege not only of knowing Christ, but the privilege also of suffering for him and being found not to have any righteousness of our own. Us has been given the privilege of knowing Christ, and not only knowing him but suffering for him, and being found not to have any righteousness of our own. It's a privilege to know Christ. And not only of knowing him, but of suffering for him, and of being found not to have any righteousness of our own. Now, he said of Philippians 3, there are a lot of things I can boast about. There are things I have by virtue of my birth. There are things I have by virtue of my qualifications and my intellectual achievements. And there are things I can boast about by virtue of my associations. He says, but all these I consider dung, a loss, in favor of knowing Christ. He says, I want to know him. I want to know the power of his resurrection. I want to know the fellowship of his suffering. I want to know him. The God who gives cars and houses, the God who gives privileges and worldly privileges. No, but I want to know the power of his resurrection, but it would never be enough to know the power of his resurrection if I did not enter into the fellowship of his suffering. The enemy knew exactly what he was doing by raising a gospel of deception in preparation for the coming persecution, the very imminent persecution now. Now, you know that Satan does not know everything, but you know that it's not like he does not know anything. Because one day Christ ventures into the temple and he's confronted by demons. The demons say, we know God's timetable. And we know that if you started tormenting us now, you are doing it prematurely. They knew that. And that is why those who know Christ and who understand his word will know that there is no scripture that gives us the privilege or the authority to send demons into hell. So often I've been in deliverance sessions and the preacher will say, I send you to the pits of hell. But no believer, no human being has that privilege, because demons cannot be tormented before their time. So the devil knows. That is why, though he does not know everything, we can assume he knows nothing. He knew that the time for some deliverer of Israel had come. And he orders that boys, Jewish baby boys, be killed, in the hope that among those killed would be Moses, except that Moses' sister Miriam, the prophetess, devises a plan that saves Moses. So the devil knew. There are things Satan knows. And there is a timetable of events that he is privy to. He does not know everything. Only God knows everything. And only God sets the limit to Satan's knowledge. He does not know everything. Because according to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, had he known everything, he would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But some other things he knows. And part of what he knew and what he knows now, I'm trying to get to Matthew 10. Part of what he knew and he knows now is there is coming a time of great persecution of the church. And is the spirit behind the great persecution. He is. And he knew that if he did not corrupt the church would be ready for persecution. Now, the church is corrupted through pleasure. When the enemy is tired and he doesn't see pressure do much of the work he wants to do in the church, he'll raise opportunities for pleasure. And one of the devices of the devil, whether you like it or not, was raising the false voice of prosperity, the false voice of deliverance, the false voice of God's protection. He knew when the enemy raised these three agendas, an agenda of new age prosperity, the agenda of occultic deliverance, and false protection. He knew he'd compromise the church into a position of materialism, hedonism, fear, and complacency. So he raised a group of false preachers and he corrupted those who had started out well in the word. And he pampered the church. And through the cooperation of most men of God, because don't forget, Satan has no authority except which we give him. He came into this warship called the church, and he moved in the minds of his preachers, and they removed all the missiles. They converted the warship. They removed all the cannons. They changed the barracks into cabins. They took out the landing strips, the on-sea, these naval vessels, that launch aircrafts, and he cleaned up, and the preachers put the pools there. And we woke up one day, and the Church of Jesus Christ was a cruise ship. It was no longer a battleship. And the sinners out there, when they looked up to this ship, whose decals had been removed, decals are those markings for the military, and they replaced them with, they even painted it. They removed all those dull military colors. He knew what he was doing. Because for the first time in the history of mankind, the church became a weekly fashion parade. The church became a den of thieves. The church became a temple of harlotry. The church became a coven of wizardry. When it did that, the world looked in. And for the first time in the history of the church, even those who had no opinion of Jesus wanted to be on this ship, and those who had no personal relationship with Christ. And some of them got onto the ship, and they proved themselves to be men and women of the people. And the people entrusted the captaincy of this once warship, which had been converted into a cruise ship. Some of these men, without the knowledge of Christ, without sharing in his fellowship and the fellowship of his suffering, without denying themselves, without taking up their crosses daily, without following him. They endeared themselves to the crowds, and the crowds volunteered the raider to them. And we woke up one day, not only were they primary passengers on this once warship that had become a cruise ship, they were captains. And there were people who sat on these ships, and they began to see the change direction. The music was changed there, and the food was changed there. And they decided to ditch this ship. And this ship was large. It was a mega ship with mega crowds. Because the crowds will go not where there is God, the crowds will go where there is convenience. The crowds will go where, pardon? Something is wrong. The crowds will go where there is entertainment and all sorts of comforts. So when they did that, some men realized that this was no longer the Lord's ship, and this was no longer traveling in that direction the Lord would have it travel. So what did they do? They took boats, little boats, they lowered little boats, and they sailed away. And we call them breakaway groups. They pitched up little tents and they met under trees. They said, look, the Lord's warship has turned into a cruise ship, and we're not going to be part of that anymore. They scorned them. They criticized them. But this man had seen the ship in his day. It was battling, fighting the Lord's battles. They saw this ship in the day it was steered by Jesus. They saw these ships in the day it was full of power. But now when you looked at this once warship that had turned into a cruise ship, there was entertainment instead of worship. We took off our military gear and put on fashion and designer label clothes. And the course changed. Satan knew what he was doing. Because when he did that, he didn't realize that the course that the ship had taken was going to be intercepted by forces of persecution. But now the soldiers, those who remain on these mega ships, the soldiers had taken off their uniforms and they were wearing designer labels. When the glory of God left the ship, they had to put on human apparels to compensate for the glory. Because when the glory leaves, you compensate. And they didn't feel comfortable preaching in t-shirts anymore, in ordinary suits. They had to put impressive clothing on to compensate for the Lord's glory. Because they didn't realize that there are times when the glory of God is upon you, like it was upon Stephen, that the people will take stones and kill you. They were tired of being persecuted. So they took off the glory. And then they took off the glory, the people loved them, but they felt empty because without the glory, there's an emptiness that comes there. So they had to find impressive clothing, religious regalia, and they had to add the pomp and the splendor. And some of them realized that while we preached an unsophisticated gospel, the people don't take us seriously. So they went to academies of learning to learn how to be eloquent and melodramatic and to add the pomp. And there was a lot of performance, but the power was gone. Because when they took off the armor, when they took off the decals and repainted the ship, that ship was still full of people. And it was easier for people to flatter this ship who had not even come to Jesus, who had not even denied themselves, who had not even carrying their crosses on their shoulders, but they were having little golden crosses hanging around the neck. It was easier for people who don't like Jesus to be drawn to his name if his name meant having staff and being known by people. And you looked on and the church had become what Joshua and Moses discussed the day Moses went into the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights to get the 10 commandments. And while he's up there, the man of the people, there are people who are leading churches, people who are loved by people, people whose meetings are flooded by people, solely by virtue of they being men of the people, not men of God. So when the man of God day, Moses, went up the mountain, it became a boring experience because the people were used to the noise of Egypt. On every corner that the people went in Egypt, there was some god, some idol there. And that is why God had to take Moses out of Egypt, to detox Moses. Because if Moses had stayed in Egypt, he would not have been acquainted to the tranquility, to the aloneness, to the quietness that makes it easy for you to hear and to see God. If Moses was flooded by the idols of Egypt wherever he went, his spiritual sight would not have been sharpened to see the burning bush. When Moses was flooded by the noise of Egypt, it was not going to be easy for him to hear that still small voice say, take off your shoes because you are standing on holy ground. And you see, if Moses' mind was not renewed, he would see nothing holy with the ground, because the natural eye wants natural stimulus. It's the spiritual eye that looks into the dead and see the holy place. The devil knew what he was doing, because when he did that, he ended up with an entertained church. He ended up with a preoccupied church. He ended up with a worldly-minded church. Just like when Moses went up the mountain, and the people of Egypt, with a leader who grew up in Egypt, who married in Egypt. You see, Moses got married in the wilderness. Moses got married outside the context of slavery. It's sad to marry as a slave, to grow as a slave, to be comforted in your position as a slave, because the day God comes, the day God calls, you are not accustomed to what you don't see. You are accustomed to the gods of the world. That's why many churches are brimming over with people. We get people who hustle every day. And they hustle for work, they hustle for cars, they hustle for money. And when we sell them the gospel of hustling, it's easy for them to embrace it because there is no cost to it. But according to Jesus Christ, there is no crown without the cross. There is no eternal life without sacrifice. There is no redemption without the sacrificial lamb. And Jesus calls us into death, into self-denial. He calls us into godliness. So the man of God is up there, because when you are truly a man of God, how do you know if you're truly a man of God? When you have no inclination to please the people. I don't wake up any day thinking of what to say to impress the people. I wake up every day to discharge the message God put in my heart, because I don't exist at the mercy of people. I exist by virtue of God's grace, mercy, and God's for knowledge and sovereignty. So the man of God is up there in the mountain, and that is why up to today, true men of God are boring characters. True men of God are irritating characters. There's nothing entertainmental about true men of God. There's nothing flamboyant. Look at every true man of God. There's nothing flamboyant about them. Like Jesus, as I says, there was nothing about him that the world would admire him. It says we looked at him and we considered him punished by God. Because he came before the Father like a plant out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty about him. If you look at a lot of true men of God, there is nothing about them. There is no flamboyancy. There's no even sophistication about a lot of men of God, because those were graduates of the wilderness. They were not graduates of Egypt. But when the true men of God went up there, and they were left with the men of the people, people love men of the people, because men of the people give people what they want. A preacher who is a man of the people is concerned about who got offended when I preached. But a true man of God is concerned about, is God happy with what I preached? And that is why a lot of true men of God don't amass the crowds, because the crowds don't go where there is death. The crowds don't go where there is the cross. The crowds don't go where there is truth, because truth is costly. Truth is costly. Men of truth don't have many friends. They don't go there. So the man of the people is down the mountain there. And the people say, where is this fellow Moses? Because what is the difference between a preacher who is a man of the people and a preacher who is a man of God? The man of the people wants to spend all the time with the people. And the man of God gravitates towards God all the time. A true servant of God leaves their prayer room to go and heal the sick. Leaves the to the poor. Leaves the prayer room to go and preach. He leaves, but a man of the people, he leaves the pulpit to go home. He leaves the pulpit to go to the way. He leaves the pulpit to go and pray. He lives for the pulpit. But a true man of God lives from the secret place of the Most High God and abides under the shadow of the Almighty. He's not an eloquent man. He's not a sophisticated man. He's not a seasoned speaker. He does not have introductions, content, and hermeneutics. He does not have all those fancy things. A lot of times they don't even have notes. Because if you go into the Bible, show me from Moses to John there in Revelation. Show me one prophet in the whole Bible, one apostle in the whole Bible who came before people with a prepared speech. Show me one. And realize that the concept of preparing sermons, it may be wise, it may be convenient, but it's not necessarily biblical. Isaiah says, the Spirit of the Lord will take me and will put me among the exiles. And for 7 days I'll sit there quietly because he had not told me what to do. And when the burden came upon me, only then did I open my mouth. Part of why this man, Isaiah, Isaac, Elijah, Moses, Jesus Christ, John the Baptist, Peter, Paul, part of why they were killed and part of why they always spoke truth is they spoke only those things God wanted said. Because there are times God would have you say nothing. Like Ezekiel, God has brought me all this way. God put me on a flight to Cape Town, and I'm in Cape Town, I have nothing to say. But then you can't do that. You can't wait upon the Lord in a culture of paid preachers. Preachers who are paid as they go. They go where the money is. They don't go where God is. They'll never take invitations that do not pay their bond. They'll never take invitations that don't pay the car. The car they bought, not necessarily because they could afford, but because it's part of the image they want to project out there. Satan knew what he was doing. So Aaron is down there. When you're a man of God, when you come down the mountain, some of the things you bear to give the people are not even prepared by you. God never dictated the 10 commandments to Moses. He said, bring the tablets, and he wrote them. But when he was up there, the man of the people said to the people, you see, the man of God takes from God, and the man of the people takes from the people. He says, give me. That's what we see with all these televangelists. Give me. They take materials from people, and in exchange they give them idols. That's the battleship that has turned into a cruise ship. So as Moses and Joshua come down the mountain, listen to what God said. Whereas when God sent Moses and Aaron, no, he sent Moses and Moses chose Aaron. When God sent Moses to Pharaoh, Moses was concerned about speech, but God was concerned about the heart. God is concerned about the hearts of his servants, not about their natural talents. The man of God is not the guy who sings better than everybody else and speaks better than everybody else. Because God says to Moses, I created the tongue. And we see God do all sorts of miracles through the life of Moses. Miracles no preacher before after Moses ever saw or experienced in the Bible. But nowhere in the entire Bible are we told that God healed Moses' stuttering. Because human weakness does not deter the grace of God. But human talent does not promote it either. So Moses comes down the mountain. He has a tablet he took from the hands of God. And down the mountain there is Aaron, who had an idol he took from the materials given by people. What people give you can only produce an idol. What God gives can only produce the law of life. And there is a colliding of two worlds. As they come down the mountain, the people are excited, because excitement alone is not an indicator of the presence of God. If you go to Christian churches, there is excitement, but there is no worship there. There is noise, but there is no victory there. There is colors, and there are colors and colorful lights, but there is no glory, because sometimes we need the blue lights, we need the red lights, we need the purple lights to compensate for the glory. Because when the glory of God comes, there is no necessity for any display of false glory. Other times the church is too elaborate inside, but the people's hearts are evil and corrupt inside. They are like whitewashed graves. We put more into the building and nothing into the people. We put more into the building and nothing into the people. The hearts of the people are nowhere near as elegant as the building, because a lot of times we have to create extra comfort. We have to create extra entertainment to compensate for the lost glory and no truth, because it would never matter how entertaining the cruise ship is. It never matter how talented the singers on the cruise ship is. Only the anointing breaks the yoke of bondage, and only truth sets free. And that is why our churches are full of people who are sinking in adultery, in idolatry, in fear, in doubt, in unbelief. Our churches and our leadership, our board meetings are full of people whose testimony we don't even know. How do we take a man, make him a leader at church, we have not even heard him testify once about what Jesus did in their lives? The battleship has turned into a cruise ship, and it has lost course. And in any direction it's going, there is persecution ahead. Only if it had remained a battleship would it bombard, would it make a way through the enemy's attacks and reach the other side. But as a cruise ship with retired soldiers, retired generals, some of the soldiers have become entertainers and waiters on that ship. Some of them are lying there by the beach instead of being out there looking out for the enemy. And that ship is sailing into demise, into destruction. And that ship cannot even save anyone or save its course. So Moses comes down the mountain, and God says, I was saying, whereas when God sent Moses to Egypt, he said to Pharaoh, let my people go. Let my people go. And he qualifies them that they may worship me. If you set my people go, if you set my people free, if you let my people go, they'll worship. The true people of God, when they are set free from poverty, they worship. When they're set free from disease, they worship. When they're set free from loneliness, they worship. Whenever the freedom of God comes, worship follows. But not a people on a cruise ship. When the people on a cruise ship are set free, they build idols that they worship instead of God. And today you walk into churches and our glory is in the parking area. It ends in the parking area. The glory is on the stage with all the gowns, with all sorts of things. And we have to beautify the place, because when there is no glory, we must beautify the place. The people may not necessarily be free, but they must say, wow, the choir. The people may not necessarily be free, but they say, wow, the music. And that is why we take witches and they sing, homosexuals and they sing, and prostitutes and they sing, gangsters and they sing. We don't care about their lifestyle. We want their talent, because our God is so stranded that he has dished his law in favor of amassing as many people as he can at any cost. The battleship has become a cruise ship, and so Moses comes down there. And God says, Moses, go and read Exodus 32. Your people, when God was fighting the gods of Egypt to set them free, he said, they are my people. When he set them free and they worship idols, he says, they can't be my people and worship idols. A lot of churches are filled with a people who, whereas they were set free by God, they have been given over into idolatry. God liberated them from Pharaoh to enslave them to the gods of Egypt. Because what's the use of a man who's been born again and ends up worshiping money? What's the use of a man who's been born again but worship women? What's the use of a man who's born again and worship power? What's the use of that man? He was set free from Pharaoh only to worship Pharaoh's gods in the wilderness. Because the God Moses had in his mind had no shape and no form. He was the God of heaven. Whereas, even though God has set Israel free, the God Aaron had in his head was a calf, the gods of Egypt. Part of the problem is we have men who come into church and they just become an extension of the kingdom of darkness. Jesus. People. He says, your people. He says, tell Pharaoh, let my people. If you want, I'll stretch forth my hand and I'll bring them out. But now he says, now they've followed their own gods. He says to Moses, your people, the people you liberated from Egypt. He says, I'll never take credit. This is not what I liberated them for. God did not save you for immorality. He did not save you for idolatry. He did not save you from the worship of money. He did not save you for the worship of politicians and the world. He set you free for himself. But now listen, Moses says to Joshua, says, there is noise in the camp. The people are happy. Moses says, but it's just noise. It's not the voice. It's not the sound of victory or the sound of defeat. It's just noise. Because noise on a cruise ship, however exciting, does not bring us victory. What church do you want to go back to? Do you want to go back to the battleship and continue bombarding hell and saving souls? Or do you want to go back to the cruise ship where people don't even have to have Jesus to be captains? They don't even have to know him. How many men behind the pulpit know Jesus? They know the Bible. Knowing the Bible, they know church liturgy, the customs and the traditions of the church is not knowing Jesus. They know politics, and they know politicians. They know they have connections in the underworld. Are you going back to a cruise ship or a battleship? Paul says, everything I had, I considered a waste. I considered it dumb. Because I want to know him. I want to know the power of his resurrection, but also I want to know the fellowship of his suffering, to be found not to have any righteousness on my own. So what did the devil do? He turned soldiers into tourists. He turned military men and women into holiday makers. And the church is a place of pleasure, a place of spiritually insignificant noise, a place of entertainment, a place of expression of worldly-mindedness, a place of harlotry. Never do that. He knew there is persecution ahead. And right now the armor of God is no longer there. We're wearing a beach wear, a swimwear. I've never seen a soldier swimwear. And persecution is upon us now. And that cruise ship is struck with fear, surrounded by the battleships of the enemy, because the enemy never lets down his guards. We're taking orders from the other ships of the enemy. They're telling us when not to pray, when to preach, when not to preach, and they're telling us when you preach, what to preach. And you are paralyzed right now. That's why even waiting from an instruction. You can go and save the lost now. Yet Jesus says to us in the book of Matthew 10, as we sleep now, as you go to bed, some of you must sleep now. He says, I send you out wolves. What? 16. Matthew 10:16. I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be shrewd as snakes, but humble as doves. But beware, you will be handed over to the courts. You will be handed over to the courts. When you start doing, there was a time in South Africa that was a far-fetched message. Don't you know how close that message is? Go and open your church hall on Sunday, and you shall see the reality of this verse. He says, you'll be handed over to the courts. You'll be flogged with whips in the synagogues. Did you hear what he said? You'll open your church there and the soldiers will come and whip you, like we've seen them abusing people. You'll stand trial before governors and kings because you're my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell us about me. When you're arrested, he never said if you're arrested. It was an eventuality with never. When you're arrested, don't worry about how you respond or what to say. God will give you the right words at the right time. For it won't be you speaking. It will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to take off all the swimwear? To repaint the Lord's battleship into military colors? Kick out the band. Stop the music. Rebuild the barracks. Take out all the executive suites. Because ahead of us there is persecution. And no cruise ship can stand against the wiles of the devil. This is Brother Shimichi Abagakoti. May the Lord greatly bless and keep you. We'll see you tomorrow evening at 10.